Only a few years ago at the BYU Women's Conference, Jessica Levere Mendoza Haynes was introduced by First Counselor Sharon Eubank, and she shared her unique perspective on embracing diversity and her personal identity within the context of the LDS Church. Haynes openly identifies as queer and views this aspect of herself as an eternal part of her identity. She emphasizes the importance of self-acceptance and asserting that she is perfect just the way that she is. As the church youth leader, Haynes takes on the role of teaching inclusivity and love to the young women under her guidance, encouraging them to use preferred pronouns. In her social media post, she has expressed that her personal revelation about her queer identity takes precedence over certain aspects of the family proclamation, which she views as a document crafted by men, and she publicly promotes her views. In recent weeks, we have seen the LDS Church call Patrick Kieran as an apostle, a man who has the reputation of being more liberal and inclusive than how the top 15 are seen collectively. Also, the church hired as its top PR spokesman Aaron Sherinian, whose public allyship with those of the LGBT community is well known at this point. In addition, we are seeing instances where the top church leadership seems to be ignoring their own policies and doctrines in favor of acceptance and inclusivity. One such example is recently where the First Presidency gave approval for a transgender woman to join the church, admitting her to baptism and onto the records of the church as a female, ignoring the very thing that has gotten members who transitioned excommunicated only a few short years ago.
And I've noticed some of the questions were, what does your membership, I mean, as you just said, like, I even have it right here, like it says female on the membership tools app.
Anybody didn't listen to the first podcast, this was not a one-off with some missionaries that went rogue in Arizona and just baptized you on the sly. Lauren was pretty clear that she had a supportive mission president. This goes through the mission president. The new converts baptism goes through the mission president, who needed to get First Presidency approval. Mm-hmm. You were taught by sisters because you're a woman. You were on the church and you received First Presidency approval for your baptism in a written communication to the mission president, the way that works. And you were came on the records as the church as female, going to Relief Society. The restrictions are you cannot attend the temple, and you're at peace with that. So if someone's wondering this was a rogue event by some whatever vocabulary we're going to use that's going to end badly, this is the First Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints with keys to authorize your baptism. And that is significant. And listeners, I recognize that if I understand the handbook correctly, if you go through a medical transition like Lauren has, that can put you sideways with church teachings. But you did that as before you joined the church. And so through the letter to the senior leaders of the church, I assume the First Presidency or whoever at the church handles these things, you were given the green light. And so some may feel there's inconsistencies there. We treat investigators that have fully transitioned different than we teach our own members who feel impressed to transition or fully transition.
This has led to a growing segment of members who claim to be confused, led by the content creators Jacob Hansen and Greg Mattson. In a candid video, Hansen, a member of the LDS Church and producer of the podcast Thoughtful Faith, addresses what he perceives as significant disconnect between the teachings of the church's top leaders on gender and homosexuality and the real-world experiences unfolding within the faith community. Hansen sheds light on his motivation and mindset, emphasizing that his concerns stem from a genuine desire to reconcile apparent contradictions rather than engaging in activism against church leaders or experiencing a faith crisis as he struggles to catch up with what some, including me, see as real change happening in the church. In this video, Hansen grapples with the challenge of reconciling the doctrinal positions of the LDS Church as taught by top leaders with the seeming tacit approval of top leadership that leads to the lived experience running contradictory to those doctrinal teachings, specifically in regards to homosexuality and support for transgender individuals. He articulates that his motivation is the need for open dialogue and consistency, seeking understanding and coherence within the teachings and actions of the church. And he addresses those accusations of activism or wavering faith. Hansen assures us that such assumptions are premature, that he is neither trying to create a new wave of people antagonized towards the church leaders, nor is he losing faith, being conflicted, as he sees an apparent shift in the church away from its conservative approach to these issues.
It's that things happen that seem to contradict what's being said in general conference, right? And the official teachings of the church. And so some people have kind of characterized, well, oh, is Jacob engaging in activism against the church? Or, oh, he's totally conflicted and he's losing faith in the church and the brethren and he's all confused. And it's like, you guys know I'm not.
Hansen then takes a moment to clarify his true motivation behind addressing the apparent discrepancies within the LDS Church. Contrary to accusations of activism or a faith crisis, Hansen seeks to convey a deeper concern rooted in the confusion, contention, and division he perceives among members. Opening up about the complexities he and fellow members face, Hansen articulates the challenge of navigating what he sees as inconsistencies in applying church doctrine and gospel principles. His primary aim is to initiate a dialogue within the LDS Church to provide clarity, allowing members to experience greater stability in their faith journeys. Hansen emphasizes that his intention is not to undermine the teachings of the church or cast doubt on its leaders, but rather to seek a harmonious alignment between doctrine and practice. He passionately expresses a desire for the church to offer clearer guidance, recognizing that this would not only alleviate confusion, but also reduce contention among members who grapple with the differing interpretations of the teachings and actions of the church. Hansen seems to be pointing to the significance of unity within the body of Christ. He contends that resolving the existing confusion is crucial for achieving unity in reducing contention and division, regardless of the outcome. Whether the teachings prove true or the actions indicate a shift towards truth, Hansen's core motivation is to end the confusion, to lessen contention, and to foster unity among the saints.
What I'm seeing is that, are we as members of the church contradicting what the brethren are doing? And are things being done even at the official level that seem to contradict things that are said? And so there's a lack of clarity, and that lack of clarity creates confusion. And confusion breeds contention and division.
But Hansen unveils a surprising revelation that adds a new layer to his narrative. Despite his earlier emphasis on seeking clarity and unity within the LDS Church, Hansen candidly admits that if the church is indeed undergoing significant changes, especially in the core doctrines around homosexuality and someone being transgender, he may no longer see himself as a member. Hence, if change is actually happening, he is in fact having a faith crisis. Contrary to his previous assertions of wanting to end confusion and division for the sake of unity, Hansen acknowledges the potential for a fundamental misalignment between his personal convictions and the potential evolving direction of the church. He grapples with the notion that should the church deviate from what he considers the core doctrines that are central to his belief, that remaining a member may be untenable for him. This revelation introduces a profound tension within Hansen's journey, challenging the narrative of purely seeking unity and that he is, in fact, not having a faith crisis.
Given. in general conference, in word, right? But there are institutional things that are happening underneath that, BYU professors or books at Deseret Book that don't seem to align with that. And that there are people who, because of maybe some of the mixed messaging, are then going out and saying, hey, this is what's going to happen. It's all going to change, right? The church is eventually going to get there. It's just a matter of waiting for these old guys to die off, and then there'll be a whole new church. And now, if they're right and I'm wrong, I totally see where they're coming from. Okay. And I won't be a member of this church at some point because it obviously is not something that will stick to certain core doctrines.
In examining Jacob Hansen's concerns about the LDS Church's alleged deviation from core doctrines, it becomes evident that his focus centers on specific issues, particularly those related to the Church's stance on homosexuality and transgender individuals. However, it is essential to acknowledge that the Church has undergone significant doctrinal shifts throughout its history, and that core doctrines have changed repeatedly over its 200 years, and the concerns raised may reflect a selective perspective. A critical examination reveals a multitude of core doctrines that have undergone substantial transformations, as well as other doctrines that maybe would be perceived as less core. But examples include free agency being redefined and labeled moral agency, plural marriage as celestial marriage, shifting to monogamous temple marriages as celestial marriage, the end of polygamy after ensuring the saints that it could never end, that you can no longer get a planet when you were once assured that that was the very purpose of exaltation, that oral sex was bad and then it wasn't, that the restoration was near complete and that now we are only in the beginning of an ongoing restoration, that birth control was contrary to the teachings of the church, and today couples are free to decide for themselves without the negative stigma, that masturbation causes a person to be gay, and that today the teaching has disappeared, that interracial marriage was sin, and now such has been disavowed, that people of color were less valiant and cursed, but such has been disavowed as well, that Jesus and God were polygamist, but such teaching is no longer taught, that Adam was God, and now he isn't, that Joseph Smith's Bible translation was a restoring of the Bible to its original form, but today is simply a flawed Bible commentary, that temple ordinances couldn't be altered until they were, that garments had supernatural protective powers until they didn't, that Joseph Smith understood the Adamic language, and Jacob Hansen himself admits that Joseph Smith actually couldn't read Adamic language. He didn't know it. That Cumorah was in New York is another example, and now we don't know. That God gave the November 2015 policy, and then 3.5 years later took it back. In concluding, it's important to note that the LDS Church has navigated a complex history of reversals and abandonment of lots of past doctrines, many of them core, challenging believers to adapt to changing perspectives all the time. The key takeaway is that every teaching, policy, and doctrine has evolved in one way or another, challenging the notion that changing doctrines, even core ones, is inherently problematic. Perhaps, in grappling with these particular changes, conservative believers might consider that maybe for you, it has never been about whether leaders were wrong over and over in the past, or whether doctrine changes as it does all the time, but rather maybe a reluctance to acknowledge that it's the doctrines that are important to you that are changing, that to change with the church would require you to acknowledge that a part of you was wrong about how it defined another human being in ways that made them less than or not acceptable.